Millionaire visits hospital with mistress pregnant wife left in critical condition without his support. In the bustling heart of New York City, behind the steel and glass towers that pierce the skyline, a scandal is about to unfold. It's a story of glamour and heartbreak, a tale where the wealthy and powerful aren't spared life's cruel twists of fate. At Mount Sinai Hospital, millionaire entrepreneur Alexander Tate is spotted, not at his pregnant wife's side, but in a private room with another woman. Whispers spread through the corridors, nurses exchanging shocked glances. The mother-to-be, Laura Tate, fights for her life and the life of her unborn child, abandoned in critical condition, while her husband's betrayal echoes through the hospital's halls. Alexander Tate was a name that commanded respect and often fear in the corridors of corporate America. Born into a lineage of entrepreneurs, he grew Tate Industries from a modest shipping company into a global empire. The Tate's home, a penthouse perched atop one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, was as much an icon of success as the family name itself. Soft golds and muted silvers adorned every surface, and original paintings by legendary artists such as Monet and Picasso graced the marble walls. If there was a place that screamed luxury, this was it. Laura Tate, his wife of 5 years, had once been part of the city's vibrant art scene. Before she married Alexander, she worked at a small, trendy gallery in Soho, curating modern installations and forging her own path. But when Alexander proposed, the world around Laura shifted. Initially, she'd wanted to keep her job, but the pull of his glamorous lifestyle won her over. She traveled the world by his side, stepped onto private jets, and dined with industry titans. Everyone told her she was living a fairy tale. Beneath the glitter, however, not all was perfect. Laura often felt overshadowed in social events that revolved around Alexander's power. Their relationship revolved around his schedule, his deals, his brand. Even so, their early love was genuine. They laughed at private jokes, took spontaneous trips to Italy, and spent late nights gazing over the sparkling Manhattan skyline. When Laura discovered she was pregnant, she felt an indescribable rush of hope. This new life growing inside her seemed to promise a deeper connection with Alexander. He had always claimed he wanted children, an heir to the Tate legacy, and at first it seemed to bring them closer than ever. Alexander doted on her, bringing her vitamins in the morning, reading about pregnancy and newborn care in between corporate deals. But as her belly grew, so did Alexander's distance. Meetings multiplied, overseas trips became more frequent, and phone calls often ended abruptly with "I have to go." Laura tried to convince herself that this was just his way of preparing for the financial responsibilities of a growing family. He was, after all, a man with a vast empire to manage. Little did she know, something far darker was brewing behind the scenes, something that would shatter the illusion of their perfect marriage in the cruelest way possible. In the final months of her pregnancy, Laura had begun to sense changes in Alexander that she couldn't quite put into words. A new edge colored his tone whenever he spoke to her. The sweet gestures, morning coffees, romantic weekend getaways became less frequent. She chalked it up to stress. After all, Tate Industries was rumored to be on the verge of a major acquisition, one that would place Alexander in the same league as high-profile magnates like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. But Laura's unease grew when Alexander started coming home later and later. On some nights, he wouldn't come home at all, insisting he'd slept in his office to finalize deals. When he did appear at breakfast, tired circles under his eyes, she would see a faint perfume on his suit that didn't belong to her. At first, she told herself it was probably a co-worker's perfume rubbing off during a long meeting, or the typical swirl of scents in a busy city. Denial can be a warm blanket, but it rarely protects for long. Eventually, she confided in her best friend, Diane Hart, Over lunch at a quaint cafe, Laura toyed with her salad, unable to muster an appetite. Diane pressed her gently for details. Laura shared her suspicions about Alexander's late nights and the unexplained perfume. Diane tried to reassure her, suggesting that perhaps the acquisition was eating at him, but her eyes showed concern. The turning point came during a social event at the new Met Gala exhibit. Alexander was absent, apparently working on finalizing a contract, leaving Laura to attend alone. She found herself fielding whispered questions from acquaintances who wondered why the famously dedicated husband was missing in action. Laura shrugged off the inquiries with a polished smile, but anxiety coiled in her stomach. That night, she returned to their penthouse to find Alexander in the shower. Typically, he'd greet her with at least a peck on the cheek, but that routine was fading away. Then, as she prepared for bed, she found a small silver earring on the coffee table. It was delicate, feminine, and certainly not hers. She could feel the blood rush in her ears. Her hands trembled. She placed the earring back on the table, quietly. In that moment, shadows of doubt no longer hovered at the corners of her mind. They took center stage, refusing to be ignored, and the unraveling of her life began. A week later, Alexander flew to London under the pretext of signing an exclusive deal with a European consortium. Laura stayed in New York, her doctor urging her not to travel due to her advanced pregnancy. She tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach and instead focused on the baby, reading parenting books and setting up the nursery in pastel shades. But something compelled her to investigate further. One evening, restless and alone, she found herself Googling Alexander's name, alongside rumors like affair and scandal. Nothing came up, except outdated articles about his business expansions. Yet her instincts told her the truth lay hidden. It wasn't until a social media post caught her eye that all her suspicions took tangible form. On a friend of a friend's Instagram story, Laura glimpsed Alexander at a high-end club in London, champagne in hand with a stunning brunette at his side. There was something about the woman's posture and Alexander's closeness to her that set alarm bells ringing. That woman was no mere associate. Laura zoomed in, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might burst from her chest. The woman's name was tagged Miranda Gray. She was a model and occasional spokesperson for luxury brands, known in certain circles for her high-profile relationships. While the video was brief, it was enough to confirm that Alexander was in her company, intimately so, despite claiming he was buried in work negotiations. The next morning, still trembling from lack of sleep, Laura confronted Alexander over the phone. She demanded an explanation. Alexander's voice, cool and controlled, brushed it off as a business celebration with potential investors. He accused her of mistrusting him, and for a moment, Laura almost believed his unwavering tone. But her intuition would not be silenced. Over the next few days, more images emerged on social media, in tabloids focusing on the rich and famous, and even whispered among acquaintances. Each new piece showcased Alexander with Miranda, often alone, in exclusive locations. The denial was over. The mistress stood revealed. Torn between heartbreak and anger, Laura found herself caught in a web of betrayal. She was pregnant, emotionally vulnerable, and about to fight for the future of her marriage and the security of her unborn child. Yet she had no idea how twisted this tale would become, or how her own health and life would soon hang in the balance. Laura initially tried to salvage her marriage, in part because of her love for Alexander, and in part because of the child growing inside her. She scheduled a marriage counseling session, hoping they could address their issues with a professional mediator. When she presented the idea to Alexander upon his return from London, he shrugged non-committally. "It might be good for you," he said, emphasizing you in a way that made Laura's stomach churn. He was careful not to fully commit to attending a session himself. At the same time, Laura's body began sending warning signs. She felt more exhausted than usual, and occasional dizzy spells made her worry about complications with her pregnancy. Her obstetrician, Dr. Heidi Thompson, insisted on regular checkups to monitor her blood pressure, which had shown troubling spikes. Despite these concerns, Laura pushed onward, focusing on the nursery, baby names, and her therapy appointments, clinging to hope that her marriage could be saved. Behind closed doors, Alexander appeared cold. Gone were the gentle touches on her growing belly and the affectionate kisses on her forehead that used to make her glow. Instead, he stared at her with a strange mix of pity and detachment, as though he were waiting for something or someone to replace her. The tension was so thick that the household staff tiptoed around, afraid to spark any arguments. One evening, a heated confrontation exploded in the penthouse living room. Laura demanded to know where Alexander spent his nights when he didn't return. He responded curtly that personal space was essential for his mental health. When she accused him of continuing the affair with Miranda, his only defense was a smirk. That was the moment she realized she might be fighting for a lost cause. The man she'd married seemed like a ghost of his former self, someone whose tenderness had been replaced by ambition and desires for something beyond the life he had with her. Their once solid foundation, built on mutual love, had cracked wide open, and in the middle of it stood Laura, pregnant, isolated, and uncertain of what lay ahead. She felt her baby kick inside her, a reminder that no matter what happened, she had to protect this new life. She couldn't know that the greatest test of her resilience was only days away, waiting to pounce at a time when she would need Alexander the most. Late on a chilly winter afternoon, Laura felt a sharp pain cut through her abdomen. At first, she thought it was a normal contraction or Braxton Hicks, especially given she was nearing her 9th month. But this pain was different, intense, alarming. Within minutes, she was doubled over on the living room couch, breathing in shallow gasps. Fearing the worst, she called her obstetrician, Dr. Thompson, who told her to come into Mount Sinai Hospital immediately. Laura fumbled for her phone to call Alexander. He didn't pick up. She tried again once, twice, 3 times. Still no answer. Desperate, she reached out to Diane, who arrived like a guardian angel within 15 minutes. Diane helped Laura down to the lobby and into her car, driving through New York's congested streets with hazards on, horn occasionally blaring, ignoring the rude gestures of other drivers. Laura clutched her belly, tears mingling with sweat. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony coursing through her. By the time they reached Mount Sinai, Laura was nearly unconscious with pain. Nurses whisked her into a wheelchair and rushed her into the maternity ward. Alarms sounded, and a flurry of medical professionals surrounded her. Dr. Thompson emerged, calm yet urgent, checking Laura's vital signs and ordering tests. The baby's heartbeat was irregular, and Laura's blood pressure was dangerously high. Meanwhile, Diane tried calling Alexander repeatedly. Finally, he answered in a clipped tone. She barely managed to explain Laura's dire situation before he cut her off. "I'm in a meeting. I'll be there when I can," he said, and hung up. Diane stared at her phone in disbelief, anger radiating through her. As Laura's condition worsened, an emergency C-section became necessary. The doctors stabilized her, preparing the operating room. Laura, half-conscious and tears streaming, reached out for anyone. She mumbled Alexander's name, but he was nowhere to be found. Diane held her hand tightly, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the medical team fought to save both mother and child. Machines beeped loudly in the background, and the sterile smell of antiseptic blanketed the air. All the while, a single question pounded in Laura's mind: where is my husband when I need him the most? Unbeknownst to Laura or anyone at the hospital, Alexander was already on his way to Mount Sinai, but not to see his wife. Word had reached him earlier that day that Miranda was involved in a minor car accident. Despite the persistent calls from Diane, Alexander decided that visiting Miranda took precedence. Her injuries were not life-threatening, but she had complained of severe neck pain. So, rather than rushing to the maternity ward, Alexander walked through the hospital doors alongside Miranda Gray. Arm in arm, they headed for the orthopedic wing, where she was to undergo tests. With his status as a prominent figure and a sizable donation to the hospital's expansion, Alexander had arranged for Miranda to have a private room away from prying eyes. It was there, in that stark, pristine room with an oversized bouquet of roses on a nearby table, that Alexander sat by Miranda's side, gently stroking her hair. Nurses passing by recognized him from business magazines. They exchanged glances, whispering about the super-rich CEO and the woman who was obviously not his wife. The irony was palpable. On the same floor, just a few hallways away, Laura lay in critical condition, awaiting an emergency C-section. The hospital's public address system occasionally beeped out urgent codes for the maternity ward, but Alexander seemed impervious to the urgency beyond Miranda's condition. The very man who had pledged his life to Laura was now devoting his attention and concern to another woman. Miranda, for her part, reveled in the attention, though she complained incessantly about her neck brace. She batted her eyelashes at Alexander, cooing about how grateful she was to have him there. In those moments, Alexander's expression softened. There was none of the distant aloofness he'd shown Laura in recent months. Though a faint sense of guilt tugged at him when he heard overhead pages for Dr. Thompson maternity ward, Alexander buried it quickly, rationalizing that someone would surely contact him if Laura's condition was truly dire. He told himself he would drop by after he was sure Miranda was stable. But as the minutes slipped away, the gulf between him and Laura's critical situation grew wider, forging a path that would ultimately have consequences more severe than he could fathom. In the operating room, the atmosphere was tense, every movement purposeful and every breath measured. Laura's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her blood pressure had spiked to dangerous levels, and the fetal heart rate was plummeting. Dr. Thompson and her team moved quickly, donning surgical gowns, prepping sterile instruments, and administering anesthesia. Laura drifted in and out of consciousness. In her lucid moments, fear clutched at her like a vise. Flashes of memories danced through her mind. Her first date with Alexander at a little Italian bistro, the day he proposed under the bright lights of Times Square, the hopeful look on his face when she first told him she was pregnant. A part of her still believed he would burst through the doors any second, take her hand, and promise that everything would be okay. But the door never opened for him. Instead, the or reverberated with the urgent commands of nurses and the steady beep of machinery. Diane, as Laura's designated support person, stood at the edge of the room, masked and anxious. She watched in both horror and awe as the surgeons made their precise incisions. The baby had to be delivered now or risk tragedy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a faint cry filled the room. Laura's baby, a precious girl, was born. Doctors swiftly cleared her airways, and the tiny infant let out another wail that seemed to echo hope. Tears streamed down Diane's face, and even Dr. Thompson's stern expression softened. However, the danger wasn't over. Laura's blood pressure was still dangerously high, and she showed signs of hemorrhaging. The team rallied around her, fighting to stabilize her vitals. Nurses scrambled to prepare blood transfusions. All the while, little Lily, as Laura had planned to name her, was taken to a neonatal station nearby for immediate evaluation. Dr. Thompson worked feverishly, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the ore. For a moment, the flicker of maternal triumph threatened to be extinguished by the cold reality of medical complications. Laura's pulse grew weaker, and the machines beeped more erratically. Outside the operating room, the hallway was eerily quiet, devoid of any family support. Alexander's seat remained empty, while Laura's life hung in the balance. For anyone watching, it was a heartbreaking testament to how alone Laura truly was in her most critical hour. While the surgeons battled to save Laura's life, news of her condition traveled swiftly through the hospital. A few of the nurses had begun whispering about the pregnant Mistress Tate in critical condition, while her husband, the wealthy Alexander Tate, was on another floor tending to his mistress. Staff members exchanged knowing looks, outraged that a woman fighting for her life wasn't receiving the support she so desperately needed from her own spouse. Diane, still wearing surgical scrubs and a hairnet, stepped out of or for a moment, needing fresh air and a chance to steady her nerves. As she paced the hallway, she spotted a nurse who recognized her from earlier. Sympathy radiated from the nurse's gaze. "I'm so sorry," the nurse said gently. "We know who Laura's husband is, but he hasn't come by. Does he even know what's happening?" "He knows," Diane replied, voice trembling with anger. "He's with someone else, someone who isn't his wife." The nurse pressed her lips together, appalled. In a burst of frustration, Diane tried Alexander's phone once more. This time, her call went to voicemail. She left a message that was short but seething. "Laura is in critical condition. Your daughter was born premature. Where the hell are you?" Even though she wasn't sure if he'd listened to the message, she had to try. At the same time, rumors spilled into the hospital lobby. By a stroke of chance, a freelance journalist visiting a relative picked up on the buzz. He overheard two nurses discussing the scandalous situation of a high-profile mogul, ignoring his laboring wife in favor of his mistress. Ever the opportunist, he stealthily took notes, considering the sensational headline it might make. "Millionaire husband ignores wife in hospital, spotted with mistress instead." Meanwhile, in Miranda's private room, Alexander scrolled through his phone, ignoring the growing number of missed calls. He rationalized that if Laura's situation was truly dire, Dr. Thompson would notify him personally. His entire focus remained on Miranda's comfort, oblivious to the life-and-death struggle unfolding just floors away. By the time the hush of night settled over Mount Sinai, nearly everyone in the building knew about Laura's crisis. Everyone, it seemed, except the one person whose presence mattered most. Alexander finally checked his phone hours later, after Miranda had been given pain medication and was dozing in her private suite. He saw multiple missed calls from Diane, along with a voicemail that he almost didn't play. But something in him hesitated. He pressed the button, and Diane's urgent tone erupted from the speaker. His expression shifted from mild annoyance to shock as the message sank in. "Laura in critical condition, premature baby." A swirl of emotions crashed through him: fear, guilt, confusion. The rational part of his mind told him he should run to his wife's side. But a more callous voice whispered that he'd already committed to Miranda's care, that perhaps the medical staff was exaggerating. After all, they had top surgeons at Mount Sinai. Laura and the baby would likely be fine. Nevertheless, a sliver of anxiety pushed him to take action. He stood up abruptly, pulling on his jacket. Miranda stirred. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice groggy and petulant. "There's a situation," he replied tersely, avoiding her gaze. "Laura's in the hospital, apparently. Something about the baby." Miranda's eyes flickered with annoyance. She never appreciated hearing Laura's name, but she managed a sympathetic pout. "You should probably check on her," she said softly, though her tone carried the faintest hint of sarcasm. Alexander mumbled something non-committal, then swiftly exited the room. He navigated the sterile hallways, following signs for the maternity ward. Each step felt heavier, weighed down by the realization that he had failed in his most basic responsibility as a husband. When he arrived, he was greeted by Diane, who stood with crossed arms and red-rimmed eyes. She glared at him, her usually warm face cold as stone. "You finally decided to show up," she spat. Alexander ignored her comment and demanded to know Laura's status. In clipped sentences, she laid out the grim facts: the emergency C-section, Laura's excessive bleeding, and the baby's precarious condition in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. A sense of dread clutched at Alexander. For the first time in months, he recognized the magnitude of his neglect. Still, pride wouldn't allow him to apologize, at least not yet. He asked to see Laura, bracing himself for the consequences that would soon ensnare them both. Inside the dimly lit recovery room, Laura lay pale and motionless, and the fourth drip in her arm and multiple monitors tracking her vitals. Her face looked ashen, dark circles beneath her eyes. She was still unconscious from the surgery and the blood loss. The rhythmic hum of medical equipment punctuated the silence like an incessant metronome. Alexander stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft click. A pang of guilt shot through him as he approached the bedside. He gently placed a hand on Laura's wrist, feeling the faint pulse of life beating beneath her skin. For the first time in a long time, he was unsure of himself. The mountain of arrogance that had guided him through countless boardroom showdowns seemed to crumble in the face of this fragile woman fighting for her life. A nurse entered, adjusting the fourth fluids and noting Laura's stats on a clipboard. Alexander cleared his throat, forcing himself to ask, "How is she?" "She lost a lot of blood," the nurse said quietly. "We've managed to stabilize her for now, but she needs rest. The next 24 hours are critical." Before exiting, the nurse gave him a reproachful look, as if silently judging the husband who had arrived too late. Alexander lowered himself into a chair, staring at Laura's face. Memories flickered through his mind: Laura laughing at a holiday party, Laura cradled in his arms on their wedding night, Laura's bright smile when he first felt the baby kick. Guilt transformed into a heavy knot that lodged in his throat. He thought about his newborn daughter, tiny, premature, and alone in the NICU. He considered going to see her, but the weight of the current moment held him captive at Laura's side. Only after several minutes did he stand, deciding he should at least inquire about the baby's condition. The halls felt colder now, the fluorescent lights harsh on his eyes. Unknown to him, from across the corridor's small window, Diane observed his every move. She saw the flicker of remorse on his face, but her anger still simmered. Whether he truly felt regret or merely guilted by the situation, she couldn't say. All she knew was that Laura, her dearest friend, was fighting for her life, and Alexander Tate's support had come a heartbeat too late. The NICU was a world unto itself, a place where hope and heartache blended in every corner. Tiny incubators lined the room, each housing a fragile infant battling for survival. Nurses and doctors in scrubs moved with quiet efficiency, administering specialized care day and night. Alexander stepped inside, his gaze instantly captured by the sight of a delicate baby girl in an incubator labeled Baby Tate. Wires and tubes hooked her up to monitors, tracking her respiration, heart rate, and oxygen levels. Her eyelids fluttered, and her minuscule hands clenched sporadically, as though she were trying to grasp onto something solid in an unfamiliar world. A neonatologist approached him. "You must be Mr. Tate," she said gently. "Your daughter is stable for the moment, but she came early and needs our support to breathe. She's a fighter, though," Swallowing hard, Alexander leaned closer to the incubator, seeing his reflection in the transparent shield. The baby's features, so small, yet so perfectly formed, stirred an unexpected wave of protective instinct. She had a tiny tuft of dark hair, just like Laura. For a fleeting moment, he felt the warmth of fatherhood spark within him. Her name, he whispered. Laura wanted to call her Lily. The neonatologist smiled. That's a lovely name. Lily is making good progress, all things considered. We're cautiously optimistic. Alexander stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching Lily's fragile chest rise and fall. Guilt washed over him in waves as he thought of how selfish he had been, focusing on Miranda's minor injuries while his wife and child faced life-threatening complications. He wondered if Lily could sense his presence, if she knew her father was standing mere inches away. Conflicted and full of regret, just then a nurse gently tapped his shoulder. "They're calling for you in the recovery room. Your wife is awake." Alexander nodded, casting one more lingering look at Lily. He didn't know what he could possibly say to Laura, how he could begin to atone for his glaring absence. The paternal pride he felt in seeing Lily warred with the shame burning in his chest for having abandoned them both at their most vulnerable moment. As he walked back toward Laura's room, the hum of NICU machinery fading behind him, Alexander realized he was on the precipice of a choice that would define the rest of his life: continue down a path of betrayal or fight for the family he was about to lose forever. Laura blinked under the harsh fluorescent lights, waking to find Dr. Thompson examining her. Pain throbbed through her body, but relief mingled with it. She was alive, though weak. The memory of the emergency C-section was foggy, but she recalled the terrifying sense of slipping away, the frantic beeps of monitors, and the doctor's urgent voices. When Dr. Thompson finished her checks, she offered a gentle smile. "You pulled through, Laura. Your baby girl is in the NICU. She's stable." A wave of emotion crashed over Laura. Tears welled in her eyes as she asked, "Can I see her?" In a while, Dr. Thompson replied softly, "First, we need to ensure you're steady enough to move. Diane is outside if you want to talk to her." Laura nodded, her throat tight. Moments later, Diane entered with slow, cautious steps, her expression torn between relief and anger. She sat beside Laura, took her hand, and squeezed gently. "You're going to be okay. Lily is beautiful small, but strong." Laura closed her eyes, tears escaping down her cheeks. "I want to hold her," she whispered. "I want her to know I'm here." Diane wrapped an arm around her. "You will soon. Just focus on getting your strength back." For a moment, they simply breathed together, letting the weight of the crisis settle. Then, Alexander cleared his throat from the doorway. Both women turned to see him standing there, anxiety etched across his features. Diane's grip on Laura's hand tightened protectively. Laura, still disoriented, blinked in confusion. The last memory she had of him was a fleeting phone call days ago. "Laura," Alexander said softly, stepping closer. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." Silence answered him. Laura searched his face, trying to reconcile the man who was supposed to be her partner with the one who abandoned her for his mistress. Emotions churned inside her: betrayal, fury, relief, and a tiny flicker of love that hadn't fully extinguished. Diane stood, looking ready to lash out, but Laura placed a trembling hand on her friend's arm. "I'll talk to him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. With one final glare at Alexander, Diane left the room, leaving them alone. An oppressive silence filled the space as Laura waited for an explanation. Alexander could see the hurt in her eyes, knew that mere words might not be enough to bridge the chasm he had created. Yet he had to try, even if it was already too late. "I heard you almost died," Alexander began, his voice shaky. It was a crude statement of the obvious, and Laura flinched. "That's what happens when you're in labor and lose too much blood," she said, bitterness coating her words. She tried to shift in the bed, but pain radiated from her incision. A moan escaped her lips. Alexander quickly moved to help, adjusting her pillows. "Don't!" Laura hissed, recoiling from his touch. "Just tell me why you weren't here." His throat felt dry. He could offer half-truths, claim he was stuck in meetings or traffic, but he knew it would only prolong the inevitable. "I was with Miranda," he finally admitted, voice low. Laura's eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. "You choose her over me? Over our child?" Alexander scrambled for the right words. "She had an accident. I thought it was serious." "By the time I realized how critical your situation was, how critical," Laura said, voice rising. "You didn't even pick up your phone to hear the details." "Alexander, I nearly died. Lily is in an incubator alone, and you were playing doting boyfriend." A flush of shame heated his cheeks. "I know. I messed up," he mumbled. "I never meant for it to go this far, Laura." Her laughter was bitter. "Go this far? You had an affair while I was pregnant. That's going too far already." She swallowed hard, tears now flowing freely. "You broke my trust, Alexander. Our marriage, our entire life, what was it all for?" He slumped into the chair beside her bed. "I don't have a good excuse. I was selfish. I let the pressures my ambition get in the way of us. And Miranda, she was a distraction." Laura closed her eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. She thought of Lily, so small, fighting for each breath. "The problem isn't just Miranda," she said quietly. "It's that you chose everything else over your own family. And now I'm not sure there's a path back." Alexander felt those words land like a hammer blow. He reached out for her hand, but she pulled away. The gravity of his actions crashed down on him, leaving him speechless. In that moment, he realized the cost of his betrayal might be higher than he ever imagined. He could lose not just his wife, but the chance to be a father to their newborn daughter. In the days that followed, Laura's recovery was steady but slow. She spent her mornings in physical therapy, learning how to move without aggravating her fresh surgical wound. Afternoons were dedicated to visiting Lily in the NICU. Each time Laura held her daughter, a sense of fierce maternal protection surged through her, clashing with the heartbreak she still felt toward Alexander. Alexander tried to be present, hovering in hospital corridors, anxious to prove he cared. He bought the best postpartum care packages, arranged a private nurse for Laura, and even donated a large sum to the NICU in Lily's name. But money couldn't undo the emotional damage. Laura allowed him to see Lily under the watchful eye of the NICU staff, but she herself remained distant. Miranda Gray, meanwhile, had recovered enough to return home. Rumors circulated that she was flaunting Alexander's gifts, a new necklace, designer clothes around her inner circle. Whispers of the scandal leaked to tabloids, and soon headlines blared, "Millionaire Alexander Tate's wife fights for life while he romances Mistress." Tate Industries' stock took a small dip as shareholders expressed concern over the negative publicity. Within the hospital, staff who recognized Alexander began to avoid him. It became harder for him to command that aura of respect he once effortlessly projected. Nurses shot him disapproving looks, and doctors exchanged polite but cold greetings. Word of his priorities on the day of his wife's critical surgery had spread, and no amount of wealth could buy back their esteem. One evening, a deeply troubled Alexander found Dr. Thompson in the hallway, reviewing charts. "Is Laura strong enough to leave the hospital?" he asked. "She's improving," Dr. Thompson replied, a professional iciness in her tone, "but she needs more rest. This has been traumatic, physically and emotionally." Alexander nodded, hesitating. "Will she make a full recovery?" "As full a recovery as one can after nearly dying, Dr. Thompson said pointedly, shutting her clipboard. "If she has support and a stable environment, yes, eventually." She walked away, leaving Alexander to grapple with the uncomfortable truth. He was the unstable variable, the root cause of Laura's emotional turmoil. Late that night, as Laura dozed in her hospital bed, Alexander looked through the glass walls of the NICU at his tiny daughter, wires still attached to her delicate body. A flood of regret washed over him. He wondered if any redemption could be found, or if he'd already lost his family forever. Laura was discharged a week later, still weak but determined. Lily remained in the NICU for further monitoring. Though Laura was reluctant to go back to the penthouse, she had nowhere else prepared. Diane offered her spare room, but Laura wanted to stay close to the hospital. With a reluctant sigh, she allowed Alexander to drive her home, planning her next steps in silence. When they arrived, the penthouse felt cavernous and cold. Memories of a happier time pressed on Laura's mind, mocking the emptiness now lingering in every room. She headed straight for the guest bedroom, ignoring Alexander's attempt to help her with her bags. Over the next few days, a kind of uneasy truce settled. Laura would rest, then visit Lily. Alexander occasionally accompanied her to the hospital, silently standing behind her as she held their child. He would attempt small gestures, fetching her water, asking about her pain, but Laura kept her responses curt and distant. Then, just when it seemed the dust might settle, a scandalous piece of evidence surfaced: paparazzi snapshots of Miranda wearing what appeared to be an engagement ring. The images were splashed across online gossip sites, with headlines speculating that Alexander planned to propose. Laura discovered the photos through a barrage of text messages from concerned friends. Fury erupted inside her, a new wave of betrayal fueling her resolve. She confronted Alexander that night. "Explain those photos," she demanded, voice echoing through the marble foyer. Alexander paled. "I didn't give her any ring," he insisted. "She must have bought it herself, or it's some publicity stunt." "You know how she is." Laura's eyes burned. "I don't know anything about her, except that she had you when I needed you most. Did you tell her you'd leave me for her? Is that what she's advertising to the world?" "No," Alexander roared, frustration snapping his composure. "I told her it was over. I swear." "Laura, I messed up, but I'm not proposing to Miranda. I'm trying to fix this fix-us. I can't lose you and Lily." Laura's shoulders trembled with suppressed sobs. She thought of her daughter, so innocent, so dependent on her parents for love and security. Could she raise Lily alone? Could she ever trust Alexander again? "I need space," she choked out finally. "Until Lily is out of the hospital, I'll stay here. But don't expect forgiveness. Don't expect anything." Alexander's words died on his lips. The final twist of the knife was that, in his attempt to have it all, he now stood on the brink of losing everything he truly cared about. Time passed like a cautious remedy, never fully erasing the pain etched into Laura's heart. After her emergency C-section and the life-threatening complications that followed, she remained physically weak and emotionally raw. Each glance at the scar on her abdomen reminded her how close she'd come to dying, while her husband, Alexander, was at another woman's side. Yet her newborn daughter, Lily, still in the NICU, compelled her to keep moving forward. Almost every morning, Laura made her way to Mount Sinai Hospital before traffic clogged the streets. In the stillness of the NICU, she would carefully slip her hand through an opening in Lily's incubator to offer the warmth of her touch. The nurses explained that skin-to-skin contact was crucial for a premature baby's development. Each time Lily curled her tiny fingers around one of Laura's, a fierce protectiveness swelled in her chest. Though the fluorescent lights and constant hum of medical equipment were daunting, Laura found a kind of solace in being close to her daughter. She refused to leave until the staff urged her to rest, reminding her that she needed strength to care for Lily once the baby was discharged. No matter how the NICU's routine momentarily soothed her, Laura couldn't erase the memory of Alexander's betrayal. While she battled for her life on the operating table, he'd chosen to be with Miranda, his mistress. The anguish of that realization clung to her like a stubborn shadow. Even so, she questioned whether her daughter was better off having both parents, if only for financial and emotional support. Conflicted and overwhelmed, Laura sought counsel from Mark Sullivan, a divorce attorney recommended by her closest friend, Diane. In the quiet stillness of Mark's office, she recounted how her once loving marriage had unraveled. Mark listened carefully, then outlined the difficulties of denying a father's rights in New York courts. Adultery alone would not sever the bond between Alexander and Lily. Sighing, Laura recognized that no matter how betrayed she felt, Alexander remained Lily's father in the eyes of the law. Shortly afterward, Mount Sinai hosted a modest fundraising gala for the NICU. Despite her own fatigue, Laura felt compelled to attend with Diane, wanting to thank the hospital staff who had saved both her and Lily. The hospital's atrium, usually a space of brisk footsteps and hushed conversations, transformed into a gathering hall dotted with tables, soft music, and subdued chatter. Families whose children had once been NICU patients shared stories of hope. Laura found brief moments of connection, learning about others who had also feared for their child's life. Midway through the gala, Alexander appeared. He offered a generous donation, then lingered by the side, reluctant to approach Laura. Whispers about the Tate scandal rippled through the crowd, and she could almost feel curious eyes turning her way. Rumors had already leaked into society pages about his affair, how he'd abandoned Laura in her most desperate hour. Eventually, Alexander worked up the courage to talk to her. His voice was subdued, explaining that Lily's condition had improved so quickly that doctors might release her sooner than expected. Despite her anger, Laura felt an undeniable surge of relief. Whatever else stood between them, they both wanted Lily to be safe and healthy. That night, she returned to her usual chair in the NICU, ready to spend another sleepless vigil near Lily's incubator. To her surprise, Alexander arrived too, taking a seat a short distance away. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the steady beeps of monitors and the low hum of machinery keeping other premature infants stable. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "I failed you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to be here for Lily." Laura, holding back tears, told him she wouldn't stop him from being Lily's father, yet she also made it clear that restoring her trust was another matter altogether. Days later, the news Laura had longed to hear arrived. Lily was well enough to be discharged. A mixture of joy and anxiety welled up inside her as she held her daughter in her arms for the journey home. Alexander accompanied them, carefully placing the diaper bag in the back seat. Laura could sense his attempts to be supportive, though her resentment still simmered just beneath the surface. Returning to the penthouse felt surreal. Once a symbol of marital bliss, it now reminded her of the illusions she had clung to. Unwilling to share a room with a man who had broken her heart, Laura firmly chose the guest suite. Alexander accepted her decision, promising he would reduce his involvement at Tate Industries so he could help with Lily's care. In the following days, Lily's presence overwhelmed the household. The baby's cries echoed through the night, shattering any hope of uninterrupted rest. Laura was still physically recovering. Her incision site throbbed if she moved too quickly. Each time she woke to Lily's wails, she dreaded the strain of getting up. Yet Alexander, surprisingly, was often first to the crib. He fumbled with bottle warmers and formula measurements, but his genuine effort softened something in Laura. She remembered how, in the past, he was too consumed by work to do even minor tasks at home. Now he seemed almost desperate to prove his commitment to fatherhood, as if every bottle he prepared was an attempt at atonement. However, every time his hand brushed hers when they passed Lily back and forth, Laura's mind flashed to her time in the hospital. She recalled how alone she'd felt, the panic the excruciating pain, and the knowledge that Alexander was nowhere near. That memory was a chasm that small acts of kindness could not instantly bridge. Still, for Lily's sake, she allowed a tenuous truce. Alexander, to his credit, tried to respect her boundaries, though she could see the regret etched on his features whenever she recoiled from his touch. Just as the routine settled into an uneasy rhythm, Miranda re-emerged. Using an old building pass, she barged into the penthouse unannounced, brandishing photos of herself and Alexander captured by paparazzi. Laura was in the living room, feeding Lily, when Miranda's sharp voice sliced through the stillness. Smirking, Miranda boasted about having sold her story to the tabloids, eager to reignite the scandal. Lily began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching up as tension filled the room. Alexander rushed downstairs, ordering Miranda to leave, but not before she hurled a few choice insults and threatened further exposure. She departed with a triumphant glint in her eye, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. It didn't take long for tabloids to plaster headlines accusing Alexander of abandoning his pregnant wife for a mistress. Tate Industries' stock prices wavered, and the board demanded damage control. Alexander threw himself into crisis management, hiring PR consultants to refute Miranda's claims. Yet no statement could entirely erase the public's fascination with the heartless millionaire and his critically ill wife. In the midst of the media storm, Alexander still rose at all hours to care for Lily, who had no clue about her father's notoriety. Laura watched from a guarded distance, unsure if guilt simply fueled his devotion. One late evening, after Lily had drifted off to sleep, Laura found Alexander in the living room. Sifting through a folder of legal documents from the PR team, she mustered her courage and spoke. "I've contacted a lawyer," she said in a low voice. "I'm considering filing for legal separation." He set down the paperwork, his expression somber as he nodded. "I understand," he replied, "but please give me a chance to show you I can be better. Lily deserves a real father, and if there's any hope left for us." He trailed off, looking at her with pleading eyes. Though bitterness still clung to her, Laura also saw a flicker of desperation that hinted he truly understood what he stood to lose. She made no promises, but admitted Lily needed him. "Prove you've changed," she said, "or I'll leave, no hesitation." From that point on, Alexander tried even harder to be present. He scheduled therapy sessions with a counselor specializing in relationships strained by infidelity and medical crises. Reluctantly, Laura agreed to attend these sessions. They forced both of them to revisit the darkest parts of their marriage, Laura's sense of abandonment, Alexander's misplaced priorities, and the profound terror she experienced in the operating room. At first, the sessions sparked more tears and anger than progress. Still, with each conversation, an odd sense of relief arose, as though the poison of betrayal was slowly being drawn out. Gradually, Laura recognized small but genuine changes in Alexander. He no longer seemed to rely on grand gestures, expensive gifts, or lavish dinners to patch things up. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and immersed himself in the daily grind of caring for Lily. He learned to detect the signs of colic, rocking Lily patiently until her cries quieted. He even mastered a few lullabies, singing to her softly before bedtime. These actions, though small, spoke louder than any apology he could offer. Laura remained guarded, but she began to feel moments of gratitude slip through her defenses. Perhaps he truly wanted redemption. One crisp morning, beams of early sunlight streamed into the penthouse. Laura sat on a plush rug, helping Lily with a bit of tummy time, hoping to strengthen the baby's neck muscles. Alexander knelt beside them, tentatively holding a squeaky toy that made Lily giggle. As Lily lifted her head and managed a tiny push-up, Alexander grinned, looking to Laura in shared delight. For a second, she let herself smile back. A wave of cautious hope swept over her, though fleeting. It signaled that not all was irreparably lost. Their marriage was far from repaired. The betrayal lingered in unspoken moments. Laura still wore her mistrust like armor, and Alexander grappled with remorse that no quick fix could ease. Yet in Lily's presence, they found small pockets of peace. The baby's soft coos during feeding time, or the sight of her sleeping, peacefully brought them both a measure of comfort. At the end of another sleepless week, Laura stood with Alexander by Lily's bassinet, watching her drift into slumber. The lamp's warm glow highlighted the exhaustion on their faces, but also a shared tenderness as they marveled at their daughter's fragile beauty. Laura thought of how easily Lily's life could have been lost, recalling her own brush with mortality on the operating table. Amid that memory, she felt Alexander's hand lightly rest on her shoulder. This time, she didn't pull away. They stood together, quietly united by the child they both adored. In that moment, a seed of possibility took root in Laura's heart. She would never forget how Alexander had abandoned her, nor could she ignore the scars left by his betrayal. Yet Lily's small yet determined spirit reminded her that life, even in its most delicate form, could persevere. If trust could be rebuilt, it would require unwavering effort from Alexander and an open mind from Laura. Perhaps they would never recapture the innocence they once had, but there was a chance to forge something more resilient, shaped by honest reflection and a hard-earned commitment. For now, Laura decided, it was enough that they both stood by Lily's side, neither retreating nor letting the past entirely dictate the future. She didn't know if she would ultimately choose reconciliation or separation. Still, Lily's soft breathing served as a gentle reminder that hope existed even in the wake of devastating betrayal. And sometimes, that faint hope was all one needed to take the next step forward, day by day, toward the possibility of healing. Thank you for joining this emotional journey through heartbreak, betrayal, and fragile hope. Laura's fight for life, baby Lily's courageous struggle in the NICU, and Alexander's reckoning with his own failures remind us that trust is both delicate and powerful, a treasure that can shatter in an instant yet be painstakingly rebuilt. If this story touched you, inspired you, or made you reflect on the strength of relationships and the complexities of forgiveness, I invite you to share it with friends and family. Please like this video if you found yourself captivated by the drama. Comment your thoughts below on the twists and turns, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama fiction and storytelling. Your support helps us continue bringing these heartfelt narratives to life. Thank you for watching, and remember, every story can find hope, even in the darkest of chapters.